So once we've gone out and we found something really, really interesting and we're going to put it on the website, is understanding whether it's eligible or not. And this is really, really important because there's lots and lots of things out there which are interesting, but it's whether or not they meet a set criteria. And we've got to have those criteria so that we can rule things out which perhaps aren't. So very, very important. We've had to draw the line somewhere, and I'll go through a bit more detail on this in a second, but there's going to be a bit of grey areas for some of it. First is the built environment. It has to be a man-made structure or something that's man-made. So with the park and garden, it has to be physically created for that purpose. It's got to be fixed, and there's going to be different things here. I mean, you might have, I think the example I used last night was there might be a park bench in this beautiful location, which is, it's been there since late Victorian times. It's beautiful cast iron made by Cole Brookdale, and it's where loads and loads of local people have perhaps proposed to each other and got engaged, and it means a lot to the community. But it's not physically fixed. So if you can move it, then we can't have it. Whereas if it is sort of bolted down, then you can, and that's the real key thing as well. And then it's the key thing here is breaking it down into those sort of criteria which help us make decisions about whether or not it's eligible or not. And we've broken it down into historic value, which is how we can understand the past through a building. Aesthetic or architectural value, which is really how beautiful it is, or how the appearance of the building makes us feel a certain way. And there's archaeological value, which is about how we understand the past through the physical evidence of a structure. If this building area or anything was fundamentally changed, would an aspect of our past, which is really important for us or future generations, also be damaged or lost? And that's probably the crux of it. So I mentioned a bit about this sort of crossover between the built and natural environments. This is a fossil forest near Penzance, and you could say, well, is this natural environment or not? We would say it's archaeology, because first of all, the trees are dead. They've been dead a long time, and also it gives us information about past human activity. So there's going to be pollen samples there. We know how old the trees were, what the sea levels were at that time. So we consider this archaeology rather than the natural environment. This was one by Anne, who found this amazing building at Polzeath, which is an old GWR railway carriage. It's amazing it survived given the amount of development in Polzeath. But what a wonderful sort of building, which tells us about, early 20th century holidaymakers in Cornwall. Clearly, it's fixed in place, even though it's on wheels. So we would be able to consider this. If it, was still movable, unfortunately, we wouldn't. So just sort of drawing some sort of clear boundaries there. So here are the three key things we're looking at for an asset to be put on the local heritage list. Archaeological value is about how a place or an object or a site might give us evidence about past human activity. So here we have a roundhouse. I've been told categorically I'm not allowed to call them hut circles because they were clearly civilized people, and they knew what they were doing. So things like that, just to be archaeology doesn't mean it has to be buried underground. It's more about how you interpret what's there. Historic value, here we've got this sort of very informal tin hut, which might relate to the use of the site by migrant agricultural workers. So there might be a huge sort of history associated with a site, which is really, really key to an area. So that's another thing, and we're looking for evidence of that as well as part of the submission. And that can be broken down into three different things. The communal one, I think, is really, really important because there's going to be so many buildings and places that we might come across where it's the memory of the site and the meaning to the community and what's happened there, which is really, really important. So an example might be a war memorial, the seat I said where lots of people might have, got engaged. There's a beautiful view, things like that. Really, really important. So don't discount things just because it's not associated with a sort of famous person or it's particularly ancient. That communal value is important as well. The other one is the sort of architectural and aesthetic value, which hopefully is sort of self-explanatory, but it doesn't mean it has to be pretty. I was looking for an example, I couldn't find one, but there's style of Victorian architecture which was meant to be purposefully ugly. It was meant to be dramatic and grotesque, and that was part of the importance of that school of architecture. So it's more about how what we've got here. I've said it's sort of draw sensory and intellectual stimulation from a place. You go around a town like Redruth, you see buildings like this, you look up and you think, gosh, isn't that lovely? It's really beautiful. And that can be accidental or on purpose. I think a good example of sort of accidental things might be, with, say, a landscape. I find spoil tips particularly beautiful, but it's accidental because of the way the trucks work and they were tipped off and you get these sort of fingers coming out. I think that's lovely, but it's purely accidental. The other three sort of relate to all three, and these will be on the website. So it's about how rare it is, whether it's sort of a landmark value, that might be, say, a statue in the middle of a town or a monument on a hill, or it might be something which memorializes something. There might have been some famous riots in a town which would use maybe the Chartists, and there was a landmark which is accidentally sort of associated with them, which wasn't purposeful. And group value, where different assets together, you might have Coast Guard cottages, lifeboat stations, fish cellars, which all relate to each other in terms of their function,